What is up? Welcome back to the channel. So today we got a little bit different project in the shop today, as you can see behind me there. We've got a F250, it is a Powerstroke, a diesel, and we're gonna be throwing a leveling kit on there so that he can get some 35s on there. So this will be a good video in case you got a good tow truck, something like that, that you wanna get a little bit bigger tires on and a leveling kit on. So let's go check out the kit and see what we got. All right, so we went to Mammoth and we got their 2.5 inch leveling kit. I like this kit. I picked this kit because it's got just a little bit of everything. So obviously we got our coil spacers, which is what's gonna actually give us the lift. We got the sway bar drop brackets. We got the shock drop brackets and some new brake line drop brackets, as well as some new brake line brackets, period. And then also the track bar drop bracket, and then our bump stop drop brackets. So as you can see there, this kit kind of had everything in it. The price was reasonable. So I think this is a pretty solid kit, and we'll see how the install goes. First thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna get the camera set up, and I'm gonna go ahead and get a measurement on that front end and see where we're starting at on height, and that way we can check and see if we actually get that 2.5 inches of lift out of this kit. All right, so this is a 2022 F250, like I said, Powerstroke diesel. So got a lot of weight in that front end. And just looking at the kit that we got, I think that all those parts are definitely gonna hold up for the weight of this vehicle. So what I'm gonna do now, let's go ahead and get a stock measurement for this front end. All right, so stock ride height, just going straight through the center of the tire up to the bottom of our fender, is 39.25. So right at 39.25. So what we're gonna do, we've already got the rear end chalked. I'm gonna go ahead and get this front end up in the air and get a couple jack stands underneath the frame. We'll leave the jack underneath the axle. We're gonna leave it there for now because we'll wanna raise and lower that axle as we're doing stuff. And then we'll go ahead and get the tires off. So let's get started. All right, so got it jacked up. We ended up moving, as you can see here, we ended up moving our jack stands to the front of the frame. The control arms on these F250s are really long, and I didn't feel comfortable putting my jack stands way back on the frame and having all that weight hanging out over the end of them. So I felt more comfortable putting my jack stands at the front of the frame. So we got it jacked up. The axle itself is supported by the jack. So that way we can adjust the height of the axle as we're working. First thing we're gonna do here is I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the lower shock bolt, pull that out. I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the sway bar and pull it away from the axle. And then I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect this brake line bracket off of the axle itself. For now, I'm gonna leave this one mounted to the frame. Once we start dropping this down, if it gets tight, I'll go ahead and disconnect this bracket up here at the frame as well. Which the kit, the extension bracket that it has is for the frame. So either way, we'll have to disconnect this at some point and get everything kind of moved down and get more play in these brake lines. We're gonna go ahead and do that on both sides. Again, it's the shock, sway bar, and brake line. Okay, so we've disconnected the lower shock bolt. I went ahead and did the bottom bolts on the sway bar brackets. I think it says in the instructions to do the top. Either which way, I guess doing the top you might be able to get it further out of the way, but I'm not really that worried about it. And then I did go ahead and disconnect this bolt. That way, if we need to, we can straighten out some of these hard lines just a bit to give us more play, but I think we've got plenty. And then I disconnected this bolt here for this bracket. So should have plenty of play in all of our wiring. So now we're ready to start lowering down our jack stand that's holding our axle up right now. We'll see how much droop we can get out of the axle, and we should have enough to pull these coils out. There you go. Yep, keep that. Yep, keep going. Run those brake lines okay over there? Yes. Okay. Yep. I got stop it there. Mine's out. How's yours look? Because you should have less play than me. Okay. Okay, you can see there, nice and easy. None of our lines got too tight, just kind of keeping an eye on all these. This one here, a little snug, but not bad. If you need to, you can pop that clip out. So, and none of our brake lines, obviously, we got plenty of play in our brake lines and our ABS lines. So before we move on to reinstalling our springs, we need to get our bump stop spacers in. So what these will do, they'll keep your shocks from bottoming out if you do get in a flex situation, or maybe you hit a hard enough bump. Since we're relocating our shocks, we don't want to bottom out our shocks. We would rather hit the bump stop first. So that's why we're doing longer bump stops. Some people don't do it on off-road vehicles because they want more travel. But for this truck, we're not looking to get a ton of articulation out of this truck, and we don't want to damage our shocks. So we're just going to go ahead and install those drop brackets. So you should be able to pop this rubber piece out, and then up inside here, there's a bolt holding this metal plate on. So we'll get the rubber piece out and then drop that plate out, install our spacer, put that plate back on, and pop the rubber back up in.
Right there.
Okay, so I should have recorded the other side because the other side went way smoother than that. That's all it is just getting that lip out from underneath these little ridges inside of there. So that one was kind of a pain. The other side went pretty smooth. Once you get that out, there's a 10 mil bolt in here. So we'll go ahead and loosen that off, and this little plate will drop down with it. Okay, so now what we'll do, we got this spacer here, and you've got, if you notice, you've got some holes cut into one side, and that is for this little, I guess, placement tab on the back of your bracket. So just make sure that that drops down in there like that. New hardware, supplied hardware, will go in through there, and then we'll just reinstall it just like this. All right, and once we get that reinstalled, we'll go ahead and get that rubber piece pressed back up and in. And if we need to, we'll just throw a little WD-40 or something to get it to slide a little bit better, and we'll get that placed back up in there. So now we're ready to go ahead and get our drop brackets in for our coils. You want to make sure that you clean all the dirt and all the debris out of the bottom of your spring perch. Just kind of get all that cleaned out so that your spring sets back in nice and flush the way it's supposed to be, because you'll always notice there's a lot of sand and dirt in the bottom of these. All right, so for reassembly here, so your spring isolator, you want to make sure that it's seated right. So you can kind of see there's the end of our spring, there's the end of our spring isolator. Just kind of make sure that that's kind of rotated, touching, so we're touching on that backside. And then as far as our lift, we're just going to drop it in the top of that, and then we're going to reinstall this whole assembly back up into place. We might need to drop the axle down more, but we're about to find out.
Oh yeah. Yep, go ahead and come down with the axle if you can. Robin, come down over there. Okay. No, oh yeah, nice. Keep going if you can. Okay, you're good. No, you can tighten it up. I don't think you're on the axle anymore, honestly.
All right, so we had to drop the axle down a little bit more to get it in. And then on the bottom down here, I think you can see it from where you're at. The end of your spring, there's a little stop on the end of your spring perch. You want to make sure that that coil is spun where it's tight to that. Double check your isolator at the top. Make sure it's still tight, and make sure everything's nice and aligned. And then we'll go do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll start raising this axle back up. Okay, so we went ahead and jacked the axle back up a little bit, just kind of making sure that the bottom of our spring stays in place, and everything on our spring isolator stays in place, and everything's nice and level. So what we did is we brought it up enough to about where I think our shock relocation brackets will end up. So that's what we're gonna do next, is go ahead and get those reinstalled, and then we'll work on dropping the sway bar. And once we get everything hooked up and everything like we like it, then we'll worry about the track bar once everything is kind of secure and held into place. Okay, so these are our drop brackets. So what we're gonna do here, this is gonna slide in the bottom location, and then we'll use the factory hardware to re-secure it. And then our shock is gonna actually mount up here now. So we're just, raising it up about 2.5 inches. Okay, so we got the lower bracket installed. It doesn't say the angle of the bracket as far as, you can swing it front and back. It doesn't really say how it needs to be. What I did is this front wall right here, or this, I guess it'd be back wall. I just did perpendicular with that, or just right in line with that. And then now we're gonna snug both these down. We had to play with the axle, the height of the axle a little bit to get these shock bolts in. But now our shock is fully reassembled, so we're gonna go ahead and tighten all that down. Both of these bolts will be torqued to 111 foot-pounds. Obviously, whenever you're working with diesels and stuff, if there's any Jeep guys watching this, it's a little more than what we're used to, but it's just because everything's heavy duty on this, with it being a diesel and a 2500. So, all right, we'll get these torqued, and then we'll move on to the sway bar drop brackets. Okay, so what we're gonna do next, or what we went ahead and did, is we threw our sway bar links back in the axle, just enough to get the nut on to hold some threads, because what we're gonna do next is drop the sway bar bracket and put those drop brackets in. But what I was gonna do before that is I'm gonna go ahead and replace this bottom brake line bracket, mainly for the passenger side over there. It kind of gets in the way of the sway bar. As the sway bar is moving up and down, it kind of wants to hit the bracket here. So that's why I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall these plates, and then we'll come back, do our sway bar drop brackets, and then we'll do our brake line drop brackets. But this plate right here should be able to be mounted up, no issues. Okay, for our sway bar, as you can see here, this is our sway bar running back. You're down underneath the vehicle now. Really all it is you're just going to pull these 2 bolts on both sides, so 4 bolts all together. We'll drop the front of this sway bar down, and then we'll put our drop brackets in. They're going to angle the drop bracket, kind of move it towards the front. So you can kind of see here, it's going to slide this whole thing forward just a little bit and down about 2 inches. So once you got these new brackets up in place and your nuts started, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go ahead and drop in your hardware, do the bolts, drop them through, because once you get these tightened up, because these bolts are so long, you can't really get your new hardware up in there. I might actually have to come down a little further on this one. Like so. And now we can go ahead and tighten these down, and all these are gonna be torqued to 35 foot-pounds. So we'll go ahead and torque all 4 of these to 35 foot-pounds, and then we'll reinstall our sway bar and put our new hardware on and torque those to 35 foot-pounds as well. All right, next thing we're gonna do is go ahead and torque our sway bar links, and those will go to 52 foot-pounds. And then after that, we'll be completely done with our sway bar. That's out of the way, and we'll move on to our brake lines. Okay, so we got our brake line brackets installed. I didn't record it because it was kind of a pain, and I had to work with it for a minute to see kind of how I wanted to do it. Pretty much what we did, this line here, straighten it out, kind of reached up. If you go way up here, you got another nice curve if you just kind of straighten those out. We finally worked it down. Now, the instructions, and on the other side, we did the bracket backwards. On this side, it worked out better to do the bracket curving forward, and then we got it in that locator tab there and put the bolt in. So now on this side, everything's all nice and done. We got that extra, 2 inches or whatever of play in our brake lines. And then let me go over to the passenger side and I'll show you over there. So this side was much easier to work with. Before there was a curve, let's see, like over and down. So just basically just straighten out those 2 curves. Here you can see our bracket curves backwards, and then got our hole in the locator tab, and then our nut and bolt on. And so got some more play out of this line. And so a little bit different on driver compared to passenger. The driver side was definitely a lot harder to get to. So anyway, we got those on. Everything is torqued up. If we didn't have the track bar drop bracket, then we would actually be done right now. But that's what we're going to move on to next, is getting that drop in the track bar and getting that old bracket out and getting the new one in. First thing we got to do is get rid of our track bar, or not get rid of it, but pull out this side and drop it down. So you can see there, I think this is a 30 mil bolt. So we'll go ahead and pull that out, and we'll set our track bar down out of the way. And then you've got 2 bolts. I don't know how well you can see them. 2 bolts here and 3 nuts over here. We'll go ahead and drop that factory bracket out, and then we'll use that same hardware and install the new bracket. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do next. So it's really a pain to get up here and get all these nuts, 3 nuts on the backside, 2 bolts, just not a lot of room to work with. We're going to go ahead and tighten those up and get them torqued to 129 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we're ready to get our track bar reinstalled. I'm going to put it up there and see. I don't think it's going to line up. Now you could do a few different things. You could try to manhandle it, use some pry bars, kind of work this axle, or more or less actually the body, one way or the other. But probably what we're going to do is throw the wheels and tires on, and then you can slightly turn the wheel left and right, and you'll be able to line up this track bar that way. But let's take a look and see. It looks pretty close. No, I don't think anything else will fit. Yeah, there we go. All right. So I just threw a little pry bar in there. We're almost lined up, and it moved the axle just fine, no problem. So I just want to make sure, since our jack stands are under the axle, that the truck's not about to fall on me. Of course, we do have the jack itself also underneath the axle as an added layer of security there. So next, we got it lined up, got the bolt in, and the last step is getting this torque down. Unfortunately, the torque specs are supposed to be at 406. I don't have a torque wrench that goes that high. I don't think most people have a torque wrench that goes that high. So what we're gonna do is get it basically as tight as we can. We had to use a breaker bar and a cheater bar on top of that to break it loose. So I'm essentially gonna do pretty much the same thing, going back to going tight with it, get it just about as tight as we can get it, and then we'll call that good. And I'll probably will go ahead and put some paint marks on it. That way it's easy to look under here and see if it's backed off at all, if anything's gotten loose. So I'll go ahead and mark this. As far as the rest of our bolts, I might mark the shock bolts as well, just to see if anything's loosened up on us. And then the rest will be good to go. And then we'll get the tires on and get some final measurements. All right, so we are done. All in all, pretty easy install, really not a whole lot to it. The hardest part, obviously, was getting that track bar torque down. We just used a breaker bar and a cheater bar, and like I said, we just got it kind of as tight as we could. I did put paint marks on all the bolts and nuts that I could get to, as far as the shock mounts, the torque or the track bar mounts, and then also that track bar bracket, the hardware holding it up. So I marked all of those. That way it's nice and easy. You can just look in there and say, okay, you know, that bolt or that nut has not backed off at all. Just a good little safety thing. And now let's check our final numbers here. So we are at 41 7/8. So we actually got 2.5, we got our 2.5 inches and then an extra 1/8 of an inch. So it's actually an 1/8 of an inch higher. Now, I will say he still has to get an alignment, and obviously once we drive this and everything, this is right where we worked on it, so we set it down off the jack. It probably hasn't settled in yet, so I bet we'll be like right at that 2.5 mark. So man, all in all, I'm really happy with this lift today, and I'm happy with the install. Was not that bad. Definitely something you could do in your garage without a problem. I will say, just with a truck like this, it being a diesel and everything else, just safety is the most important thing you can think of, because you're dealing with a lot of weight and obviously some higher torque specs. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.